My name is Kayla Vance, and just 3 months ago, I watched my supervisor, a woman who believed only in soulless spreadsheets, publicly destroy a year of my life's work. She stood over my workstation, sneered at our entire department that my efforts were worthless garbage. Then, with a venomous click, she pressed delete. 23 horrified faces watched my data vanish, along with my dignity. What she thought she erased was just digital files. What she actually destroyed was the invisible bedrock, holding our entire company together. 30 seconds later, my phone buzzed with an offer that would change everything. A $500,000 job. That's when I realized she hadn't just humiliated me. She had handed me the perfect weapon for the most satisfying professional vengeance I could ever have imagined. Before I dive into the delicious details of how watching her panic became the sweetest moment of my career, hit that like button and subscribe. Because what I'm about to share will prove that one moment of cruelty can backfire in ways you never thought possible, until it unfolds right before your eyes. And trust me, you need to hear every single excruciating detail of this unfold. Let me take you back to where this all began. Because revenge stories, the truly epic ones, always start long before the actual revenge takes center stage. 18 months ago, I packed up my life in a tiny apartment in Portland, Oregon, and moved to the bustling competitive tech scene of Seattle, Washington. I was 26, fresh out of a demanding MBA program, and brimming with idealistic notions about making a difference. I landed a job at Apex Innovations, a mid-sized tech consultancy that promised innovation and client-centric solutions. My role was Client Relationship Coordinator. The job description sounded mundane. Maintain communication records, schedule follow-ups, track client satisfaction metrics. It felt like a stepping stone, a quiet entry into the corporate world, but I was determined to make it more. What they didn't mention during the glossy interview process was the pervasive sense of dread that hung over the client services department like a Seattle rain cloud. Our company was hemorrhaging accounts faster than anyone wanted to admit, a silent bleeding that threatened to decimate our revenue. The previous person in my exact role had lasted a mere 4 months before quitting without so much as a 2-week notice, leaving behind a digital graveyard of unfinished tasks and disillusioned clients. From day one, my supervisor, a woman named Octavia Thorne, made it abundantly clear that she considered my role, and indeed any emphasis on relationships, as unnecessary overhead. Octavia was one of those managers who saw business as a purely transactional beast. Her philosophy was cold, hard, and utterly devoid of human nuance. Send invoices, deliver services, collect payments, repeat. The very idea that clients might yearn for actual human connection, for a sense of being valued beyond their quarterly payments, was utterly foreign to her meticulously systematic approach to everything. She lived by spreadsheets and metrics, and anything that couldn't be quantified into a neat, sterile column was, in her eyes, inefficient fluff. But in those first few weeks, as I sifted through the dusty digital archives of past client interactions, I saw something entirely different. Page after page of dry, robotic communication logs, emails that read like automated responses, call summaries devoid of any personal warmth. There was no personality, no indication that anyone at Apex Innovations had ever bothered to learn anything personal about the people who were sending us tens of thousands of dollars every single month. It was like reading transcripts from a bot, not from a human interaction meant to foster trust and loyalty. So I started doing something that, in that stark efficiency-obsessed environment, felt nothing short of radical. I began treating our clients like actual breathing human beings. It started small. When Benjamin Ben Carter, the gruff but kind owner of a thriving construction firm, casually mentioned during a routine check-in call that his beloved Labrador, Max, was recovering from knee surgery, I didn't just nod. I made a discreet note in my personal client file. 2 weeks later, I followed up, genuinely asking how Max's recovery was progressing. Ben was so genuinely surprised that someone had remembered, that someone cared. that he spent 20 minutes regaling me with stories of Max's stubborn refusal to wear his recovery cone and his weekend trip to a specialized canine physiotherapist. That casual human connection, born of empathy, solidified our professional bond more than any perfectly processed invoice ever could. Then there was Eleanor Vance, the visionary CEO of a rapidly expanding artisanal coffee roasting company. When I noticed through her company's public announcements that she was celebrating her firm's 10th anniversary, I didn't send a generic, automated congratulations. I crafted a personalized message, acknowledging the significant milestone and asking about her plans for future growth and community engagement. She didn't just reply with a polite thank you. She ended up scheduling an additional consultation session, one that hadn't been in our quarterly projections, and it brought in $15,000 of unexpected, high-margin revenue for Apex Innovations. She told me, "Kayla, you actually listened to my vision, not just my budget. That's rare." These weren't grand gestures or expensive gifts. I simply listened when people shared pieces of their lives. I remembered what truly mattered to them, and I followed up in ways that showed I actually cared about their success, their challenges, and their personal well-being, far beyond what they simply paid us. It was basic human decency, translated into a professional context, and it was working wonders. Octavia Thorne, however, never understood what I was doing. She would stalk past my workstation, her sharp eyes darting over my screen, seeing me type what looked to her like casual conversation notes, and I could practically feel her disapproval radiating across the open-plan office space. During our monthly one-on-one reviews, she would flip through my activity reports with visible frustration, her polished pen tapping impatiently against her clipboard. "Kayla," she'd snap, her voice laced with barely concealed annoyance, "why are you spending 45 minutes on calls that should take 15? Our efficiency metrics clearly show you're processing fewer client interactions per hour than optimal. This is not how we operate." I tried to explain, patiently at first, then, with growing exasperation, that longer, more engaged conversations were building stronger relationships. That clients were specifically requesting to work with me on new projects, that our client retention rate had demonstrably improved by nearly 40% since I had started personalizing our approach. I even presented charts and graphs showing the direct correlation between personalized outreach and increased contract renewals. But Octavia only cared about numbers that fit her rigidly defined spreadsheet formulas. She was blind to the qualitative, the intangible, the human element that was, ironically, driving the very quantitative improvements she so relentlessly pursued. What she failed to realize, what she simply couldn't grasp, was that I was building something far more valuable than efficient call logs. I was becoming the indispensable bridge between our company and the very people who kept us in business. Marcus Thorne, the eccentric but brilliant owner of a chain of high-end boutique hotels, began calling me directly whenever he needed anything, bypassing our company's labyrinthine main number entirely. He told me he appreciated talking to someone who remembered that he was passionate about collecting rare vintage travel guides and that his daughter was studying hospitality management in Switzerland. He felt seen, heard, and understood. And that, he implicitly communicated, was a level of service he simply couldn't find anywhere else. Then there was Serafina Dubois, whose luxury event planning business accounted for our third largest monthly revenue. She began recommending Apex Innovations to other high-net-worth clients specifically because she enjoyed our conversations about her weekend trips to art galleries and her grandmother's treasured collection of antique lace. Month after month, I watched our client satisfaction scores climb, while Octavia remained stubbornly fixated on efficiency metrics that completely missed the point. She was meticulously measuring how quickly we could process interactions, while I was quietly, painstakingly building the deep, enduring loyalty that would determine whether those interactions continued happening at all. The breaking point, the seismic shift that would ultimately unravel Octavia's entire world, came during our annual strategic planning meeting. Our CEO, a pragmatic but ultimately detached executive named Julian Mercer, was reviewing department performance when he mentioned, almost as an aside, that client retention had reached an all-time high. He specifically praised our relationship management approach, something previously ignored, and even suggested expanding the personal touch strategy across other departments. I watched Octavia Thorne's expression, usually a mask of stoic professionalism, subtly contort. A flicker of resentment, then barely concealed fury, crossed her face as the credit for improved retention landed squarely on what she considered my wildly inefficient, utterly unprofessional methods. She looked like someone had just told her her meticulous spreadsheets were written in crayon. After the meeting, she cornered me near the employee lounge, her voice tight with suppressed anger, barely a whisper but sharp as broken glass. "I don't know what kind of theatrical performance you're running, Kayla," she hissed, her eyes like chips of ice. "But this company succeeds on professional excellence, not social hour conversations with clients. Your personal touches are a gross misallocation of resources, and frankly, they're unprofessional." To punish me, she assigned me to complete a comprehensive, excruciatingly detailed audit of all client interactions over the past year. She demanded meticulous documentation of every communication, every follow-up note, every single minute relationship-building effort I had made. It was clearly intended as punishment, a sadistic form of bureaucratic busywork, designed to pull me away from the actual client work that was driving our success. And she hoped, drown me in paperwork. Hundreds of hours, probably thousands, spent proving what was already evident in our rising revenue. But I approached the audit project with the same meticulous attention to personal detail that I brought to my client work. It was tedious, yes, but also a chance to create an undeniable, irrefutable record of my impact. I created intricate records, not just showing what communications had occurred, but how those communications had directly translated into tangible business outcomes. I documented the catering referrals that Serafina had generated after our conversations about her grandmother's recipes. I tracked the expanded services that Ben had purchased after we discussed Max's recovery and his own company's growth plans. I highlighted the early contract renewal that Marcus had signed simply because he trusted our partnership and valued our conversations about his vintage travel guides. The finished audit was a staggering 78 pages of irrefutable proof. 78 pages demonstrating, with cold, hard facts, that personal attention to client relationships was directly responsible for over $300,000 in additional unexpected revenue. Every casual conversation about weekend plans or family celebrations had, in fact, strengthened business ties that our competitors simply couldn't replicate with their generic, purely transactional professional approach. I was proud of that audit. It represented not just a year of grueling work, but a year of genuine human connections that had fundamentally transformed how our company related to the people who trusted us with their business, which made what happened next, what Octavia Thorne did, even more devastating, more unforgivable. Octavia called an all-hands department meeting on a crisp Tuesday morning in late autumn. She announced, with a smirk that made my stomach churn, that we needed to review our client relationship protocols and that my audit would serve as a crucial case study for discussion. I walked into that conference room, a flicker of hope in my chest, assuming she was finally ready to acknowledge that personal attention was driving our improved performance. I envisioned her, perhaps begrudgingly, admitting her error, announcing a new, more holistic approach. Instead, she directed me to display my meticulously prepared audit files on the main conference room screen, the projector casting my detailed work for the entire department to scrutinize. Then, with a chillingly calm demeanor, she began dissecting every personal note, every casual conversation detail, every single relationship-building effort, not as evidence of success, but as proof of unprofessional boundary violations. Her voice, usually devoid of emotion, now dripped with thinly veiled contempt. "This," she declared, her finger jabbing at the screen as she scrolled through months of careful documentation, "is exactly the kind of inefficiency that undermines our service standards. Personal chit-chat about pets and hobbies has no place in professional business communications. These files represent a complete failure to maintain appropriate professional distance and a shocking waste of company resources. I felt a fiery blush spread across my neck, burning up into my cheeks as 23 pairs of eyes, my coworkers, watched her systematically tear apart work that had generated significant, undeniable revenue for our company. She was presenting my greatest professional accomplishment, the very engine of our recent success, as a cautionary tale, a lesson in what not to do. The humiliation was a physical ache, a tightening in my chest that made it hard to breathe. But then, with a smirk that told me she knew exactly what she was doing, she did something that crossed a line I never expected her to cross. She navigated through the folders on the screen, pulling up the master file containing my complete audit database. Every client note, every relationship detail, every conversation record, every single piece of data that proved how personal attention was driving our business success. Her finger, steady and deliberate, moved toward the delete option, even as she continued her condescending lecture about the need for strict professional standards. This entire approach, she announced, her hand hovering over the deletion command, her voice radiating contempt and triumph, is nothing but worthless garbage. Beginning today, we return to efficient, professional, and impersonal client communication protocols. No more wasted time on frivolous chit-chat. And then, with a final, decisive click, she pressed delete. I watched, horrified and helpless, as a year of my life's work, a year of meticulous relationship building, a year of documented connections that had generated hundreds of thousands of dollars in revenue, vanished from the screen. 53 pages of irrefutable proof, gone in one vindictive, spiteful moment. The silence in the conference room was absolute, heavy, almost suffocating, as everyone processed the professional assassination that had just occurred. Octavia turned away from the screen, a look of smug satisfaction on her face, clearly expecting me to accept this public humiliation and meekly start rebuilding my work according to her preferred soulless methods. But she had made one crucial, catastrophic miscalculation. While she was destroying my documentation, she couldn't destroy the actual relationships I had built. The clients who trusted me, who called me directly, who had shared personal details about their lives and businesses, those connections existed not in our computer files, but in their hearts and minds. And apparently, some of those connections had been paying far more careful attention to our company dynamics than anyone, especially Octavia, had ever realized. My phone started buzzing, a low, insistent vibration against my thigh. Before Octavia had even finished explaining her new efficiency protocols, the caller ID showed the Vanguard Group, a prestigious consulting firm that had recently been formed when 3 former senior colleagues from a rival company had left to start their own innovative venture. I stepped out of the conference room, my hands still shaking from watching my hard work get deleted in front of everyone, my mind a whirlwind of shock and fury. "Kayla?" said the voice on the other end, warm and familiar. It was David Thorne, one of the Vanguard Group's co-founders, a man I had admired from afar for his ethical approach to business. "We've been watching what's happening at Apex, and we need to talk. Immediately." The conversation that followed, whispered furiously in the quiet hallway of Apex Innovations, would change everything. The Vanguard Group had been meticulously tracking Apex's client retention improvements, and they knew exactly who was responsible for the relationships that kept major accounts happy. They had been planning to approach me for months, patiently waiting for the right moment. Watching Octavia publicly dismantle my work, the ultimate proof of Apex's internal dysfunction, had convinced them that the timing was now perfect. "We're prepared to offer you $500,000 annually to join our team," David said, his voice brimming with genuine excitement. "Plus, significant equity participation in our firm and complete autonomy over client relationship strategies. We believe personal attention and genuine human connection are the future of business consulting, and we want you to build that future with us without interference. $500,000. More than double my current compensation. working for people who valued exactly what Octavia Thorne considered worthless inefficiency. But the most beautiful, most satisfying part of their offer wasn't the astronomical sum of money. "We know you can't bring proprietary information from Apex," David continued, his voice calm and reassuring. "But we also know that client relationships are built on trust and personal connection, not on sterile database files. If you choose to join us, and if clients then choose to work with someone they trust, rather than staying with someone who treats them like transaction numbers, that's simply the natural consequence of different business philosophies." I understood immediately what they were suggesting. They weren't asking me to steal clients or violate any legal agreements. They were simply pointing out that if I left Apex and clients, by their own free will, decided they preferred working with someone who remembered their dog's health problems and their daughter's college plans, that was their choice to make. The loyalty I had painstakingly built, person by person, client by client, resided not in the digital records Octavia had so contemptuously deleted, but in the intangible bonds of human connection. And that, it turned out, was a currency Octavia Thorne would never understand, let alone control. When I walked back into the conference room, the scene was exactly as I had left it. Octavia was still lecturing about professional efficiency standards, her voice droning on, while my former coworkers stared at their hands or notebooks, clearly uncomfortable, clearly processing the injustice they had just witnessed. She noticed my return and paused her presentation, a smug, expectant look on her face. "Do you have questions about our new communication protocols, Kayla?" she asked, a patronizing smile playing on her lips. I looked around the room at the people I had worked alongside for 18 months, a mixture of faces, some still shocked, some looking away in awkward silence, a few with what looked like dawning understanding in their eyes. Then I glanced at the blank screen where my audit, my year of effort, had been displayed before being destroyed. Finally, my gaze settled on Octavia's expectant expression, a smirk still fixed on her face, waiting for me to accept her verdict. "Actually," I said, my voice cutting through the stale air of the conference room, surprisingly steady despite the adrenaline coursing through my system, "I have something to announce." What happened next would become the most satisfying moment of my professional life, the kind of scene that plays out in your dreams after years of injustice. But I want to save that for the next part of this story, because the revenge that followed was so perfectly orchestrated by Octavia Thorne herself that you need to hear exactly how her own actions, her own hubris, created the domino effect that brought down everything she thought she was protecting. The true beauty of what unfolded wasn't that I meticulously planned some elaborate scheme to hurt her or the company. The profound, elegant beauty was that by deleting my relationship-building work, by publicly declaring it worthless, she had just eliminated the only thing keeping our biggest clients from walking away. She thought she was deleting inefficient documentation, a problem she was solving with ruthless precision. What she actually deleted was the living, breathing foundation of customer loyalty that took a year to build, client by painstaking client, and could disappear in a matter of weeks once the true nature of Apex Innovations under her leadership was exposed. And when my phone rang with that $500,000 offer, I realized she had just handed me the key to the most elegant revenge possible, simply stepping aside and letting natural consequences unfold, while she watched everything she thought she controlled, everything she had built her career on, slip away forever. "I'm resigning from Apex Innovations, effective immediately," I announced, my voice cutting through the suddenly deathly quiet conference room. "I'll be joining the Vanguard Group as their Director of Client Relations." The silence that followed was absolute. You could hear the hum of the air conditioning unit, the distant city traffic, and the almost imperceptible click of someone's pen nervously tapping against their notepad. Octavia's smug satisfaction vanished instantly, replaced first by confusion, then by a dawning, terrifying understanding that twisted her features into something that looked almost like pure panic. "You can't just quit in the middle of a department meeting," she stammered, clearly thrown off balance by this completely unexpected development. "There are protocols, notice requirements, Transition procedures. Her voice was higher than usual, cracking with disbelief. Actually, I replied, pulling out my phone and displaying the contract offer I had just received, along with a screenshot of my employment agreement's termination clauses. My employment agreement allows for immediate resignation in cases of a hostile work environment or professional misconduct. Having my work deleted in front of colleagues while being publicly humiliated, not to mention the documented pattern of undermining my role, qualifies on both counts. Mrs. Thorne. Julian Mercer, our CEO, who had been quietly observing from the back of the room, looking increasingly uncomfortable, stepped forward. Perhaps we should discuss this privately, Kayla, before making any hasty decisions. We can work this out. But I was done with private discussions, done with diplomatic solutions, done with being silenced and undermined. Octavia Thorne had chosen to humiliate me publicly, and now she would get to experience the consequences just as publicly. There's nothing to discuss, Mr. Mercer, I said, gathering my few personal items from the conference table. My decision is final. I'll submit formal resignation paperwork within the hour. As I walked toward the conference room exit, I could feel 23 pairs of eyes following my movement. Some of my coworkers looked utterly shocked. Others looked impressed, and a few looked like they were reconsidering their own career choices. Their expressions a mix of fear and dawning inspiration. Octavia called after me, her voice shrill with desperation. You're making a huge mistake, Kayla. The Vanguard Group is a startup with no proven track record. You're throwing away job security for some fantasy about relationship building being more important than professional standards. I paused at the doorway and turned back to face her, a small, knowing smile playing on my lips. We'll see which approach proves more valuable, Octavia. Within 24 hours, I had cleaned out my desk, completed exit interviews with a sympathetic HR representative who seemed to be hiding a smile, and started my new position at the Vanguard Group. Their office was smaller than Apex's, located in a trendy, collaborative co-working space in downtown Seattle, but it was buzzing with an electric energy and excitement about building something truly innovative in the consulting space. More importantly, I was finally working with people who genuinely understood that business relationships were built on genuine human connection, not cold efficiency metrics and standardized communication protocols. It felt like coming home. But the real validation of my decision, the true, exquisite revenge, came in the weeks that followed as I watched the natural consequences of Octavia's actions unfold with devastating precision. I hadn't reached out to any Apex clients. I hadn't made any sales calls. I hadn't sent any recruitment messages. I simply updated my professional profiles on LinkedIn and our company website to reflect my new position, and I continued being the same person who had spent a year building authentic relationships with people who needed consulting services. My integrity was my greatest asset, and I wouldn't compromise it, not even for revenge. The first call came on Thursday morning, just 3 days after I started at the Vanguard Group. It was Benjamin Carter, the manufacturing company owner whose golden retriever, Max, I had asked about during routine check-ins. He called my new office number directly, bypassing Apex entirely. Kayla, he said, his voice surprisingly warm. I heard through the professional network that you've moved to a new firm. I wanted to congratulate you and ask about your new company's capabilities. We talked for an hour about his business needs, his expansion plans, and yes, Max's improved mobility after the specialist treatment. By the end of the conversation, he had scheduled a consultation meeting to discuss transitioning his account to the Vanguard Group. The second call came that same afternoon. It was Eleanor Vance, the textile company's CEO whose anniversary I had celebrated. She wanted to discuss her upcoming project needs with someone who actually understood her business, philosophy, and aspirations. I've been working with consulting firms for 12 years, she told me, her voice firm and clear. And you're the first person who ever made me feel like my company mattered beyond the invoice amount. If you're offering the same personal attention at your new firm, Kayla, I'm interested in making a change. By the end of my first week at the Vanguard Group, I had received unsolicited calls from 8 former Apex clients. Not because I had solicited them, Not because I had poached them, but because they preferred working with someone who treated them as individuals rather than cold account numbers. They chose to follow the human connection, not the corporate badge. Meanwhile, back at Apex Innovations, Octavia Thorne was starting to realize, with terrifying clarity, what she had actually deleted when she destroyed my meticulously compiled relationship-building documentation. I heard about her growing panic through mutual connections in the professional community. Apparently, she had tried to reach out to major clients for routine check-ins, only to discover that many of them were no longer interested in continuing their contracts with Apex. When she called Benjamin Carter to schedule his quarterly review, he politely informed her that he was exploring other consulting options and would not be renewing his annual agreement. When she contacted Eleanor Vance about upcoming project needs, Eleanor explained, with polite finality, that she had found a consulting partner who better understood her business values. One by one, the clients I had spent a year building genuine relationships with were making the choice to work with someone who remembered their personal details, their specific business challenges, and their individual communication preferences. Octavia Thorne had fundamentally believed that client loyalty was intrinsically tied to Apex's brand reputation and service quality. She was now discovering, with devastating consequences, that client loyalty was actually tied to the personal connections, the human touch, that made people feel valued and understood. The third week after my departure, I received a call that made everything perfectly clear about how devastating Octavia's decision had become. It was Marcus Thorne, the boutique hotel owner, who had started calling me directly instead of going through Apex's main number. He wanted to share some information that he thought I should know, a delightful piece of schadenfreude that cemented my satisfaction. "Kayla," he chuckled, a rich, rolling laugh that made me smile. "Octavia called me yesterday, asking if there were any service issues that might explain why I was considering other consulting options. When I told her I was following you to the Vanguard group because I valued our personal connection and your unique understanding of my business, she actually argued with me about it." He laughed harder, a truly amused sound. "She told me that professional relationships should be based on service quality, not personal chit-chat about books and family. She said I was making an emotional decision instead of a business decision. Can you believe that? She was lecturing me about how I should choose my own consulting partners." That phone call revealed everything about why Octavia Thorne's approach was failing so spectacularly. Even when faced with undeniable, empirical evidence that personal relationships were driving client decisions, she couldn't or wouldn't adjust her fundamental philosophy. She was still trying to convince people that efficiency metrics mattered more than feeling valued and understood. Her worldview was a rigid, unyielding cage, and she was trapped within it, even as her empire crumbled around her. By the end of my first month at the Vanguard Group, 14 former Apex clients had either officially switched to our firm or initiated serious conversations about potential transitions. These weren't small accounts. They represented over 65% of Apex Innovations' annual revenue. I wasn't actively recruiting them, as per my agreement. I was simply being available when they called, remembering details about their lives and businesses, and providing the same authentic, personal attention that had built our relationships in the first place. The Vanguard Group was thriving beyond their most optimistic projections, rapidly expanding our team and securing new, exciting projects. Meanwhile, Apex Innovations was experiencing the worst client retention crisis in company history, a self-inflicted wound administered by their very own head of client relations. The most satisfying part wasn't the money or the professional success, though both were undeniably incredible. The most satisfying part was knowing that Octavia Thorne had created this entire, devastating situation herself, through her stubborn refusal to value what clients actually wanted, what actually drove their loyalty. She could have supported my relationship-building approach. She could have learned from the improved retention rates and client satisfaction scores. She could have recognized that personal attention was generating measurable, undeniable business results. Instead, She had chosen to publicly humiliate me and delete work that represented hundreds of thousands of dollars in client loyalty, apparently believing that her cold, efficiency-focused philosophy was more important than actual evidence of what worked. 2 months after my departure, I heard through professional networks that Julian Mercer, the CEO, had called an emergency board meeting to address the escalating client retention crisis. Apex Innovations was facing the grim possibility of mass layoffs, drastically reduced operations, and potentially being forced to sell to a larger, more predatory firm simply to survive the catastrophic revenue loss. Octavia Thorne, who had been so supremely confident about her professional standards and efficiency metrics, was now scrambling, desperately trying to explain how the company had lost most of its major accounts within 8 weeks of my departure. According to sources who were still working there, she had initially tried to blame my departure for the client defections, arguing, in her typical fashion, that I had somehow poisoned client relationships or violated ethical standards to steal accounts. But the timeline simply didn't support her wild accusations. Clients weren't leaving immediately after I resigned. They were leaving after attempting to maintain relationships with Octavia's new, brutal, efficiency-focused approach and quickly discovering that they preferred working with people who treated them as individuals, not transaction numbers. The internal board investigation at Apex revealed exactly what I could have told them months earlier, had anyone bothered to listen. Clients choose consulting partners based on trust, communication quality, and feeling valued, not on how quickly their calls get processed or how efficiently their concerns get categorized. Octavia Thorne had spent a year dismissing relationship building as inefficient social hour conversation, and now she was facing the brutal, undeniable consequences of that philosophy in the form of client defections that threatened the entire company's survival. 3 months after my departure, I received the call that truly made this revenge story complete, the crescendo of my carefully orchestrated triumph. Julian Mercer, the CEO who had watched passively as Octavia deleted my work, contacted me personally to discuss what he euphemistically called a potential partnership opportunity. He wanted to know if the Vanguard Group would be interested in acquiring Apex Innovations' remaining client accounts and possibly hiring some of their staff during what he described as a strategic restructuring process. The company that had considered my relationship-building approach inefficient garbage was now hoping to sell their remaining, rapidly dwindling assets to the firm that had been built on exactly the principles Octavia Thorne had so contemptuously rejected. During our conversation, Julian mentioned almost apologetically that they were also re-evaluating leadership approaches in their client relations department. Reading between the lines, it was clear that Octavia's position was no longer secure. "I have to ask, Kayla," he said toward the end of our call, his voice tinged with a desperate hope. "What would it take to bring you back to Apex as Director of Client Relations? We're prepared to offer significant compensation increases and complete autonomy over relationship management strategies. Whatever you need." The irony was incredible, almost theatrical. 3 months after watching my life's work get deleted in front of my colleagues, after being publicly humiliated, I was being recruited back to implement exactly the same approach, but now at a much higher salary, with complete authority, and as a savior for the very department that had scorned my methods. But I had no interest in returning to work for people who had only learned to value my approach after losing millions of dollars in revenue and facing utter collapse. "I appreciate the offer, Julian," I told him, my voice calm and professional, devoid of any gloating, though I felt a surge of triumphant satisfaction deep inside. "But I'm very happy with my current position at the Vanguard Group. We understood the value of personal client relationships from day one, rather than having to learn it through a devastating crisis. Our growth proves that." 6 months after leaving Apex Innovations, I was promoted to senior partner at the Vanguard Group, with significant equity participation and responsibility for expanding our client relationship philosophy across multiple service lines. The clients who had followed me from Apex became the bedrock for our most successful year in company history, a testament to the power of genuine connection. Meanwhile, Apex Innovations underwent the strategic restructuring, that Julian Mercer had so euphemistically described. They laid off 40% of their staff, sold their largest office space, and ultimately merged with a smaller, no-name competitor who, ironically, valued efficiency metrics over everything else, just as Octavia had. Octavia Thorne was not retained during the merger. I learned about her departure through LinkedIn updates and professional network conversations. According to former colleagues, she had spent her final months at Apex trying, desperately and futilely, to rebuild client relationships using the same impersonal, transactional approach that had caused the crisis in the first place. She apparently never understood that the problem wasn't her communication skills or technical knowledge. The problem was her fundamental, unshakable belief that business relationships should be purely transactional, that human connection was a weakness, not a strength. The last update I heard about her situation came from a mutual professional contact who mentioned that she was having extreme difficulty finding comparable positions because her most recent role had ended during a major client retention crisis. Potential employers were understandably concerned about hiring someone whose management approach had contributed to such significant revenue loss, especially in client-facing roles where relationship building was considered absolutely essential. I felt no pleasure in hearing about her career difficulties. My satisfaction came from a deeper place, knowing that the very principles she had mocked and rejected were now recognized throughout our industry as essential for sustainable business success. Every forward-thinking consulting firm was now investing heavily in personal client relationship strategies. Every professional development program emphasized the critical importance of treating clients as individuals rather than mere transaction sources. Every truly successful consulting practice prioritized exactly the approach that Octavia Thorne had considered inefficient garbage. She had been profoundly wrong about what clients valued, wrong about what drove business success, and catastrophically wrong about the indispensable importance of personal connections in professional relationships. And her wrongness had been revealed, not through elaborate schemes or calculated attacks from my side, but simply through allowing natural consequences to unfold after she chose to publicly destroy work that represented the very foundation of customer loyalty. The most elegant revenge is always the kind where your enemy defeats themselves through their own actions, and you simply have to step aside and let their poor decisions create the destruction they so thoroughly deserve. Today, 2 years after watching my audit files get deleted in front of 23 incredulous colleagues, I'm running the client relations division for one of the fastest-growing consulting firms in our region. Our success is built entirely on the principle that Octavia Thorne rejected, that business relationships thrive when people feel valued, understood, and personally connected to their service providers. Every day, I get to work with clients who appreciate having their birthdays remembered, their family updates acknowledged, and their business challenges addressed with genuine personal investment in their success. And every day, I'm reminded that the best revenge against people who undervalue your contributions is simply proving them wrong through your continued undeniable success elsewhere. Octavia Thorne thought she was deleting inefficient documentation when she destroyed my relationship building work. What she actually deleted was the only thing, the very last thing, preventing her professional world from collapsing entirely around her. Sometimes, the most satisfying revenge is simply letting people experience the natural, inevitable consequences of their own terrible decisions, while you build something infinitely better, infinitely more meaningful, somewhere else. Have you ever had someone undervalue work that you knew was important? How did you handle it? Share your stories in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, if you've ever felt dismissed or unappreciated, please hit that like button and subscribe for more real-life experiences about workplace revenge that writes itself when you simply let incompetent managers face the consequences of their own poor judgment. Your contributions matter. Your humanity matters. Never let anyone tell you otherwise.